Alpan, how you doing?
Hey, Echo. I wanted to ask you about the professions because what I noticed in that they don't have any profession dailies. What's your intake on that? Because that's the best way to have that's the best way for dailies to become relevant like the professions.
All right, so you're talking about profession daily specifically.
Yes.
Now, professions in World of Warcraft have sort of historically been very much neglected. Blizzard have never really been able to figure out what they wanted professions to be. At the start of World of Warcraft, professions were meant, so sort of around Wrath, professions were meant to be part of your power. So a lot of the professions, herbalism, for example, gave you increased haste and attack speed, I believe, for 20 seconds after you on a 2-minute timer. So professions really were very closely tied to your power base. It was sort of the ultimate kind of borrowed power system, but it never disappeared because you would always have your profession. This led to a lot of really like degenerate playstyles where I did this myself. I remember sort of herbalism was really strong and then they nerfed it. But enchanting had the back like the back enchants. So I actually dropped herbalism for enchanting, and then I took up tailoring because it had or enchanting at enchanting at something, and then tailoring had a different enchant that you could use. So you would, as a raider, sort of swap between professions depending on which one got buffed and which one got nerfed. And this would usually lead to thousands upon thousands of dollars dropped on the auction house to level. So I remember leveling both enchanting and tailoring on my warlock in like one afternoon from 0 to max, just by going to the auction house, buying everything I needed, just crafting until, you know, I have everything at max. Because those were the two best professions at the time for a warlock. And then Inscription came out and it had the shoulder enchants. So suddenly I had to go, okay, Inscription is actually stronger than I believe at the time Enchanting. So I actually dropped Enchanting and then max leveled Inscription to get that so that I could get the shoulder. So it was a degenerate playstyle for specifically hardcore raiders. But really it was the only people that mattered. Like the only people that really cared about professions would be the more hardcore raiders, because professions really was just a power gain. At its core, that's all it did. Professions historically never really gave you max level gear. I think in TBC actually it did. So in TBC you had Mooncloth and Shadowcloth and sort of the ability to specialize in sort of blacksmithing had the armor specialization or the weapon specialization. Engineering had the two types of specializations, goblin or gnome engineering. Back then, there were some utility to the professions, but Blizzard could never really figure out what they want professions to be in World of Warcraft. So when they finally decided to remove the power level from sort of professions, and they didn't really ever have a different foundation for the professions, so professions no longer granted you individual powers. The specific perks of professions no longer increased your power. You no longer had cooldowns from it. Blizzard was sort of at a loss of what exactly are you supposed to do now with these professions. And rightfully so, because I think in some ways, Blizzard was sort of always thinking, what happens if we allow people to craft max level items of the best quality? So what happens if you can craft a mythic level item? What happens to our gearing system? And the reason for it is, so in order to understand what's wrong with professions, you have to sort of look more broadly at World of Warcraft as a whole. World of Warcraft is a game that is fundamentally designed for the hardcore player. The casual player barely matter, right? The hardcore player is what is important. Everything in the game is designed for the hardcore player. So if you're going to give professions the ability to craft hardcore items, then suddenly there's no need for people to do the hardcore content in order to get the hardcore items. So it would sort of be, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot. You've spent all this time perfecting your game around the hardcore player, now you're going to give people the ability to get hardcore items without actually being a hardcore player. That's not really going to work, right? So instead, what Blizzard have done historically is sort of give people the ability to quick level with crafting, at least at the beginning of the expansion, and then crafting sort of falls off because it does nothing afterwards, unless you have jewel crafting, engineering can sometimes be useful. Alchemy, I'm sure I'm forgetting at least one. It's jewel crafting, enchanting, alchemy, and engineering. Those are the four that is always sort of relevant. Okay?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the problem with alchemy and jewelry is that there's a lot of multi-boxing with the situation that, like back in BFA, they all crafted the area and it's just left an empty note for a normal player.
Yeah.
So the only way to fix it is have dailies of getting those crafting without having that multi-box situation problem like that anymore. So
I don't think dailies as a whole is the way to fix it, because crafting has a lot, like the problems for crafting is deeper rooted than just activities for crafters, and it became clear during Legion. So in Legion, Blizzard really started to, like, they gave crafting its own questing sort of experience and its own story, and people actually didn't like that. Like, a lot of people did not enjoy the fact that now they have quests that they have to do in order to craft, and you have the different crafting tiers. So Legion sort of highlighted or exposed the inherent problems with crafting, and that is that if you want crafting to matter, crafting has to matter. There should be a reason to have crafting, and you should be able to craft really powerful things for crafting. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have dailies for crafting. I think you should absolutely have a quest line and dailies for crafting. But I also think that Blizzard needs to go even further. I think what Blizzard is doing now with crafting is a good first step, as Preach said during his Allcraft appearance. It's a 5-step plan. The crafting, this is step 1, and it's a good step. But we have to see them take this further. We now need to see sort of crafting-only dungeons and crafting-only gameplay systems being implemented that crafters can take part in. You know, so you guys in Final Fantasy know this really well. You have that zone. What is the zone called again?
Diadem,
which is a zone purely made for crafters. You have the treasure hunt system, which is an entire system purely made for crafters. No one else really needs to go there. If you're a crafter, you get a shit ton of crafting materials, but no one else is going to get anything from the treasure hunts. So it really is systems that purely exist for crafters out there. And you sort of want to... Blizzard needs to take this system further now. They now need to start looking at crafting as a viable way to play the game. That's really what it all boils down to. Should a person be able to play World of Warcraft and only craft and have fun with it? And the answer is yes. It's an MMO. People should be able to play the game whichever way they want. If you want to be a tailor, if that's your fantasy, so your fantasy isn't to be a warlock or a warrior, your fantasy isn't to kill the hardest bosses in the game, your fantasy is to craft the best gear that these raiders will use in order to slay the boss, you should be able to play that fantasy, and there should be ways for you to play that fantasy.
Yeah. So the only thing what Blizzard needs to do is go back to its roots, what made the fundamentals of their profession great, and use those roots to improve some of the areas that they don't need on that system.
Yeah, they have to. It sounds so cliche, but it really is. They have to lose their old way of thinking about professions. I said this so... I don't know if you know who Greg Street is, or Ghostcrawler. He goes by the name Ghostcrawler. He asked a question on Twitter where he said, let's be negative for a bit. Let me just quickly tweets and replies here. All right, so Greg Street says, so let's be a little more negative for a moment. Without bashing other games, what features do you not want to see in this game we are making? He's making the new Riot MMO. And I wrote the following. I said, a story that will change on a whim or not be respected. Tie the game to the lore and the lore to the game. I don't want to see a story that just changes on a whim. And then I said, no part of the game should exist only because all games have it. Leveling is a good example. Leveling shouldn't just exist to get you to endgame. It should be an adventure. And that is true for crafting as well. Crafting shouldn't just exist as a means to an end. Crafting should be the adventure. And if crafters can make good gear for hardcore raiders, then great. But crafting in itself should be the reason to be a crafter. If you are only a crafter so that you can raid, you failed. You should be a crafter so that you can be a crafter. And if you want to be a crafter and a raider, great. But right now, the only reason people have professions is some professions save you money. So people will usually be jewel crafters or alchemists or enchanters because it saves money, so they don't have to buy the enchants and stuff off the auction house. Or most people will just have a profession because you've always had a profession. So systems should not exist purely to enable other systems. Systems should be in and of themselves fun and interesting. That's how you fix it.
Yes, true. Anyways, thank you so much for that question. I hope you have a wonderful day, Ato.
The same to you, Alpen. Thank you so much for the question. And really appreciate it. Take care of yourself.
You too.